Hi, my name is Adam. Welcome back to GodotGameLab. This is the season finale of Slay the Spire in Godot 4. In this video, we'll introduce sound effects and music to the game. On top of that, I'll show you how easily we can create and add new content to the game by introducing a new bad enemy to the game and also adding a new card to the player's deck, which deals AoE damage. On top of that, we'll finally get rid of our debug messages for the win and lose conditions of the game. So when I actually win the game, we'll see this victorious sign here and I can click on awesome to close the game. So for one last time, let's get started. So let's open up the project first and we'll start by creating music and sound effects and adding those to the game. The first thing we need to do is to click on this audio dock down here, which will bring up this menu where we can see all of our audio buses. We only have one right now, which is called master, but we'll add two new audio buses, one for the sound effects and one for the music. And to do so, we'll click on this add bus button right here. Rename this new bus to sound effects or SFX in short, and add a new bus again and name this one music. So why do we need those two different or separate audio buses? Well, it's super useful because we can control their volume separately, for example. So if we were to add the settings menu to our game later on, the player can use a slider to change the music and the sound effects volume separately from each other. And also we have things like adding effects like reverb or EQ, compressor, all that good stuff. We can add it separately to our buses if we ever want to do that later on. And we also have a mute toggle button here as well. And the cool thing about this audio buses is that we can set all this from code later on if we have to. So for now, that's all the setup we need here. We can click on this audio dock button again to close it. And there are many ways to implement playing sound effects and music in your game. I opted for a pretty easy solution here. We'll use two different auto loads for the sound effects and the music. So with these auto load classes, we can play audio from anywhere in our project by passing on the audio file we want to play. And to do this, we'll use a shared script actually between the sound effect player and the music player because they essentially do the same thing. And to do so, we'll expand this global folder and create a new script. So right click, create new script, and we can call this something like soundplayer.gd. Double click to open this up in the editor. So what do we need to do here? First of all, we want to use class name here because both of the nodes, the sound effect player and the music player nodes, will be auto loads, which means that we can access them by their node's name and we don't need to use. In fact, we can't even use the class name attribute here, but we do need the play method to play a specific sound. So we'll have two parameters, one for that audio file we want to play, and one is a flag which we call single and it's by default equal to false. And what do we do here? First of all, we'll check if we have a valid audio file or not, because if we don't have anything we want to play, then we can return from this function immediately. Then, if the single flag is set to true, that means that no other audio can play simultaneously to this new one. So what we do is we stop all the audio stream players before playing that new sound. And after that, we'll iterate through all the children of this node, and the children of the sound effects player and music player node will be audio stream players. So we'll grab them as audio stream players and then check if that specific player is free or not. And by free, I mean if it's playing another sound at the moment, it's not free. So we only want a player which is free, which is not playing a sound currently. And if we found one, we'll set the stream property to this audio file we want to play and call the player's play method. And here we can also break out from the for loop because we no longer need to search for a non-occupied or free audio player because we already found one, right? And for the stop method, we'll iterate through all the children first, grab the current child as an audio stream player, and call the stop method to stop it from playing. And that's all the code we need. We'll use this both in the sound effects player scene and the music player scene, which we'll do next. So go ahead and save this with Ctrl S. So now we can go ahead and create the music player scene first. And to do so, we'll click on this plus sign to create a new scene. Go back to 2D view, and our root node will be another node. And we'll use the simplest possible node here, which is the node itself. Double click and rename this to music player. And we'll add audio stream players as children to this node. So click on the plus sign or press Ctrl A, search for audio stream player. And we can right click and duplicate this or press Ctrl D a couple of times. I think 4 of these will be enough, because if you think about it, it's really unlikely that we need to play more than 4 music tracks at the same time, right? So now what we need to do is we need to set the bus to use the new audio bus we just provided here for the music. And to do so, I just select all of them at once. So I press and hold Shift and click on the first one to select all 4 audio stream players. And under the inspector, we don't really need to set anything here other than the bus. So under bus, we'll click on this drop down and select music. Right, so they all use the music bus we created. And that's all we need from this scene. So we can go ahead and save this with Ctrl S. We can save it under global as musicplayer.tscn. But also, let's not forget to attach the script we just wrote earlier. So click on the music player, the root node, click on the attach script. And this time we won't do a new one, but click on this folder icon instead and load the sound player script. Press load, which will open up the script we just wrote. But we can go back to 2D view and press Ctrl S. The last thing we need to do is to add it as an auto load to the project. So go to project, project settings, auto load, click on this folder icon and search under global for musicplayer.tscn. The node name music player will be perfectly fine. So click on add. And you can see that we have our music player here now. So we can close this. And that's all the setup we need for the music player. But that's just setting up all the stuff. Why don't we hook up the game so we have music enabled? And to do so, we'll need to go back to the battle scene and change up the battles script a bit. So click on the battles script to open it up in the editor. And here the change is pretty simple actually. First of all, we'll need a new export variable for the music track for this battle, which will be of type audio stream. Then, in the start battle function, we'll call the music player's play method by passing on this export variable as a parameter and saying that, yes, this is a single track we want to play. So if any other music is playing, then stop that music before playing this one. We can go ahead and save this script with Ctrl S. And if we go back to 2D view, we can set this new music track for the battle scene. So if we select the root node, the battle node, you can see that we have this new export variable for the music, and right now it's empty. So if we click on this little arrow and press quick load, you can see all the sounds we have in our project. And this 8-bit Iced Village lo-fi track is the one I've been using for this game. So click on open. And now if we run the game, we should be able to hear the music, but it's pretty loud, right? So if we close the game and go back to our little audio dock here and turn the volume down a couple decibels, like so, and we run the game again, music will be a bit less loud. Cool. Another thing I want to show you is that maybe you want to loop the music, right? So if the battle goes on for long, then you don't want the music to stop when the track's over. And to do so, we'll actually need to change the music file itself. So if we expand the art folder, you can see that we have this 8-bit Iced Village lo-fi track here. And if I double click this, we have the import settings for this track. And what we need to do is we need to check this loop enable property and press re-import. And if we do so and double click it again, you can see that looping is enabled, which means that the audio stream player will loop the track when it's over. Okay, cool. So we can save everything with Ctrl S, and that's the music part done really. So with the music done, we can do the sound effects next. So first of all, let's add a new scene by clicking on this plus sign. Select other node, and we'll use a simple node again as a root node. And double click this to rename this to something like SFXPlayer. And again, we'll add child nodes and use the audio stream player. And press Ctrl D to duplicate this a couple of times. here I will use 8 audio stream players. Because if you think about it with sound effects, it's much more likely that we'll play more of them simultaneously, right? So we'll have 8 in this case. And again, we can select all of them at once if I press and hold Shift and click on the first one. And you can see that I have 7 selected here, and I wanted to have 8. So let's duplicate this one more time actually. Select all of them, now I have 8 selected, and change the bus to the SFX bus we have. And let's not forget to attach a script to the root node, to the SFXPlayer node by clicking on this attach script button. And again, we'll use the folder and use the very same script we used for the music player. Double click this, press load, you can see that we have the same script here. And if we go back to 2D view, that's all the setup we need. So we can save this scene with Ctrl S and call it SFXPlayer.tscn. Perfect. And we also need to add this as an auto load to the project. So go to project, project settings, click on this little folder, SFXPlayer, and we can rename this. I would like it to have SFX with all caps, like so. That's perfect. And we have the music player and the SFXPlayer available throughout the whole project. Nice, so we can close the project settings and start hooking this up. So next up, we have all the setup we need for the sound effects, but we still need to hook them up. So where do we want to have sound effects in our game? Well, for now, we want to have sound effects when the enemy is doing something, which is the enemy action, if you think about it. And also when we play cards, which should be in the card resource, right? Again, if you think a bit further, both the cards and the enemy actions rely on effects to actually do something in the game, like gaining block or damaging someone. So we can assign sound effects to cards and enemy actions, but to the effects themselves. And we can save a bunch of work with that. So why don't we start with the cards? So go to the script tab, press Ctrl-Alt-O, and search for card.gd. And here, the only modification we need to do is we need to create a new export variable for the sound, which I put under the card visuals group, and it will be a type of audio stream. And a quick note here. If we scroll down, we have this play function here, where we actually play the card. And you can ask me, hey Adam, why don't we just call the SFXPlayer's play method here and play the sound effect here, regardless of which card we are talking about? And yeah, we can certainly do that, but let me tell you why I didn't choose this option. It's probably the easiest way to do it actually, but I still think this apply effects function, which we code separately for all the cards in the game, is where it makes the most sense to do this. Why? Well, because we have more control over how and when we want to play sound effects, right? Because if we just say SFXPlayer.play here, that means that for every card, we just play the sound effect that is assigned to it once, and that's it. But what if I have a card like Twin Strike in Slay the Spire, right? Which strikes twice in a quick succession, one after another. Then, if we leave it up to the cards themselves to implement sound effect playing in this apply effects function, we can use twins, for example, to play the assigned sound effect twice, like 0.2 seconds one after another. But we can't do that here because this play function is a generic one, which we'll use for every card, right? So again, we go back to this topic of encapsulation. And I think that sometimes sound effects are very tied to specific cards, and we can't just say that every card has one sound effect assigned to it. If that's the case for your project, then by any means do it that way, because that's the easiest one, right? But here, I do this for every single card in their own code, if that makes sense. But for now, that's all we need. So we can go ahead and save this script with Ctrl-S and move on to the enemy actions by pressing Ctrl-Alt-O and searching for enemy action.gd. And here we actually do the same thing. The only thing we need here is another export variable, an audio stream for the sound. But we won't really care about the implementation of playing that specific sound, because we can leave that up to the enemy actions themselves, right? Because they have their own code anyway. So we can encapsulate this logic too, just like we do with the cards. So that's all we need here. Press Ctrl-S to save this. And the last one we need to do is for effects. So press Ctrl-Alt-O again and search for effect.gd. And here, if you remember, effects are not resources, but these ref counted objects we can create from code. So it doesn't really make sense to have export variables here, but what we can have is a member variable for the sound that effect has. And by default in this base class, we can leave this empty, but we can set it for the specific effects like a block effect or a damage effect or so on. We can save this with Ctrl S, and then we can actually assign the sound effects themselves to the cards and the enemy actions in the inspector. So to do so, let's go back to 2D view and let's start with the cards. If we expand the characters folder, you can see that under the warrior, we have these 2 cards ready to go. And if I double click the X attack card, you can see that I have no sound under the card visuals. And that can happen even though we have this new export variable. We might need to restart the editor for this. I guess this is just a bug with Godot 4.1. So if I go to project, reload current project, and double click this warrior X attack again, I should have this sound property here now. So for the attack, we can quick load a sound like the X.ogg. And for the blocking card, we can again quick load a sound and we can use the block.ogg. That's all the setup we need for the cards. And we need to do the same for the crab enemies actions. So if we press Ctrl-Shift-O and search for crab enemy AI, you can see that we have our 3 actions here. And if I click on them, we have this empty sound property, which we set up in code. So if I click on this and quick load, for the attack action, we can use the enemy attack.ogg. For the block and mega block actions, I can select both of them at once and quick load the enemy block.ogg. So we have that for both of them. We can save this with Ctrl S. And even though we assign the sounds, if I play the game now and play one of my attack cards, there are no sound effects playing, right? Why is that? Well, we assign these properties in the code, but we haven't really called the SFXPlayer's play function anywhere, right? So that's what we'll do next. And the question is, where do we do this? Well, if we open up the X attack, for example, by double clicking the script, we might need to do something here. But here we have a decision to make again. So we can definitely do something like SFXPlayer.play, and we have our sound property, right? So we can do this and this works just fine. But if you think about it, now in this game, we only have damage effects and block effects, which do something, right? And you might want to assign sounds for the effects too. For example, if you think about the poison effect in Slay the Spire, it definitely has a sound when the poison activates. So another way to do this is to handle this sound effect playing in the specific effects themselves, the damage effect and the block effect. And then what we can do is we can just change the sound for this damage effect to the sound we have for the card. Something like damage effect.sound equals sound. And then we'll handle playing this sound in the damage effect class. So if I click on this damage effect class and say something like target.takeDamage around, that's perfect. Under this we can do something like SFXPlayer.play sound. Right? And for this card we'll have the sound from our card. So if we save the game now and play the game, when I play this X attack card, it plays the sound effect. Awesome. And we can do the same for the blocking card too. If we press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for warrior block.gd, here we can say that the block effect sound property should be the same as we have for the card, right? And then when we save this script and go to the block effect class, we can say that after we increment the block for the target, we call the SFXPlayer autoloads play method with the sound property we have for this specific effect, which is set by the card. So if we save this script, that's all the setup we need. If we play the game again, and play a defensive card, we hear the sound effect for the blocking. But we still have no sound effects for the enemy itself. No matter if it takes damage or defense. So how do we do it for the enemies? If we go back to 2D view, you can see that we have these 3 actions, and we already have the sound clips attached to those actions, right? We just need to set their scripts too. So if we go ahead and edit the attack actions script, we can do something like, you can see we have a damage effect here when the enemy attacks, right? So what we can do is we can say that damage effect.sound should equal to our own sound effect we have assigned to this enemy action. And now if we save this and play the game, when the crab enemy attacks me, it will play the enemy attack.ogg. Awesome. Now we just need to do the same for the crab's block action and the mega block action. So if I press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for block action, crab block action, and we can do block effect.sound equals to our sound. Save this, press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for the mega block action. And under the perform action method, we can do the same. So block effect.sound equals to sound. And if we save the game again, all sounds should work just fine. So if we run the game and end our turn, enemy takes the block. If the enemy attacks me, it plays the sound. If he does the mega block action, we can hear the sound too. Cool. So that's all we really need for the sound effects. Okay, so the next thing we can do is to make the win and the lose state a bit more interesting, because right now we only have a debug message, right? And to do so, we create a new screen for when the battle is over, either because we won or we lost. And to do so, we'll create a new scene. So click on this plus sign and go back to 2D view. Zoom in a bit so we can see what's going on. And for the root node, we use the panel. So click on this other node and search for panel. And first of all, double click to rename this to something like battle over panel. And click on the anchored presets to make sure that it's set to full rect. So it covers up the whole screen. Nice. And here you can see that we have our default brown panel with the borders. But for this one, actually, I don't really want to use that. So for this specific case, we'll actually override it with a new panel. So click on theme overrides, styles, and under empty, we can select new style box flat. And if you click on the style box, we can use full black color for this and crank the alpha a bit lower to something like this maybe. And to this panel, we'll add a new child node, a VBox container. And we'll set this VBox container to be anchored to the center of the screen. So click on the anchor presets and select the center one. And as a child to this VBox container, we'll add 3 new nodes. So first of all, we'll add a label to display a text. Then we can select the VBox container again and add a new button. And we can duplicate this button actually. So we have 2 buttons and the label. For the label, we can type in something like victorious exclamation mark. That seems perfect. We can align it on the center for both axes. And this text should be a bit bigger. And to do so, we'll click on this label settings here and create a new label settings resource and set the font size to something like 24 maybe. Yeah, that looks a lot nicer. And now let's go to the button nodes. The first one will say something like awesome and an exclamation mark. And the other one will say something like restart. Let's rename the first button node to continue button and the second one to restart button. And we can select both of them to adjust the parameters a bit. So under layout, we can set a custom minimum size to something like 50 by 16. That looks a lot better, but they are way too wide, right? And if we go under container sizing, we can uncheck this fill and check shrink center. Perfect. Now the only problem we have is that this restart font looks a bit weird, right? And I found that this has to do with the font settings. So if we expand our art folder, you can see that we have this pixelrpg.ttf font here. And if we double click this, it will bring up this rendering options and import settings panel. And we have this option called subpixel positioning. And if we set this to disabled and re-import the text, everything looks screwed now, right? And this might seem a bit weird, but I found that we need to restart the editor for these effects to take a change. But before we do that, let's not forget that we haven't saved this battle over panel yet. So first of all, let's save this scene with Ctrl S, go to Scenes, UI, and battle over panel TSCN is fine, save this. And again, go to project and reload current project. And if we come back to our project now, you can see that this restart text fixed itself with this subpixel positioning turned off. Cool. So now this looks perfect. The only thing left to do is to select all of these nodes because we need to interact with them or do something with them in the code. And we might change this panel in the future. So for now, what we do is we right click all of these nodes and press access them as unique names. So they have this % sign here. And no matter how we change our battle over panel in the future, we can still access these nodes by their names. So let's save this scene with Ctrl S and we can move on to the coding part. So click on the battle over panel node, the root node, click on attach script, battle over panel.gd is fine. For the templates, we can select the empty one, so we don't have auto-generated code, and press create. So what do we need to do here? First of all, we'll have our custom class name for this called battle over panel. Then we'll have an enum called type, because we have two different kinds of battle over screens, one for winning this battle and one for losing it. Then we'll have three already variable references to our scene unique nodes, the label and the two buttons. Then in the ready callback, we'll connect the continue button's signal to quitting the game for now, and the restart button signal to reloading the current scene, so we can test how these end screen buttons look like. Then we'll have a function called show screen, and we'll receive a text as a parameter, which will be the message we display in the label, and the type, whether this is a winning or a losing screen. And no matter if it's a winning or a losing screen, we'll set the label's text to this text parameter we have, and we'll toggle the button's visibilities because only one of them will be active at a time, and it depends on the type of battle over screen we are showing here. So if we won, then the continue button will be visible, but if we lose, the restart button will be visible, and the other one will be hidden. And that's all the code we need for the battle over panel for now. But in order to hook this up in our game, we'll need a new event in our event system. So press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for events.gd to open up the event bus. And here we'll create a new event, which we'll call battle over screen requested, with two parameters, one for the text we want to display and one for the type, the enum type, whether it's a winning or a losing screen. And with this new event done, we can save this script with Ctrl S, and we can actually go back to the battle over panel for a second. So if we press Ctrl-Alt-O and search for battle over panel.gd, we can go ahead and connect to this new signal in our ready callback. So we'll say events.battleoverscreenrequested.connect, and we can connect our show screen method to this signal, to this event. Cool. Now we just need a place to emit this signal, right? So we can save this script for now with Ctrl S. But there's one method I actually forgot to call. So in our show screen method here, this battle over panel won't be visible by default. So after we set everything up to show the screen, we actually need to show the screen. So let's not forget to call the show method here, okay? So we still need this. So now we can save this. And we need to hook this up in our battle scene and change the battle script too. So now that we're editing scripts, we can go over to the battles script by pressing Ctrl+O and searching for battle.gd. And here we just need to change our two debug print messages. So instead of printing out victory to the console, we'll say events.battleOverScreenRequested.emit, and the message will be victorious, and we'll say that this is a win type of screen we want to show. And similarly, when we lose the game, so when the player died, then instead of printing out game over, we'll say events.battleOverScreenRequested.emit, and the message will be game over, and this type we want to have a losing type of battle over panel. Phew, that's all the code we need, so we can save this with Ctrl+S. But we actually need to instantiate this battle over panel in our battle, because we don't have it yet. So go back to the battle scene and switch back to 2D view, and see we have no battle over panel here. So what we can do is we can create a new canvas layer for this to make sure that everything stays organized. So let's select the battle node, the root node, click on add child or press Ctrl+A, search for canvas layer, double click and rename this to something like battle over layer, and make sure that it's on top of our battle UI, so we can increment the layer to layer 2, for example. And here we can instantiate our battle over panel with this instantiate button or pressing Ctrl+Shift+A. And we need to search for battle over panel.tscn. And you can see how it looks like. I think that's fine, but we need to hide it by default, right? So it's not visible when we play the game. So we can click on this eye icon to toggle the visibility. And now we can test this. So let's save the battle scene and run the game. And now if we kill this crab enemy, we see this victorious sign here. And if I click on awesome, the game closes itself. Now let's see if we can lose the game too. So if I search for the character's resource, again we can change our max health to significantly lower, so we can die by an attack. And if we play the game again, oh perfect, so this crab wants to attack me, and if I let him to do so, I'll die and it says game over. But you can see that I still have these cards drawn and going to the next turn, which is a bit weird. But if I click restart, the game restarts and I can try again. But we should do something about this, right? Because we don't want to start our next turn when we are already dead. That's a bit weird. So what we can do is pause the game when we go to this battle over panel, right? So why don't we do this? If we go back to the battle over panels script, we can pause the game when we show the screen. And it's actually pretty easy to do so. All we need to do is, after the show method is called, we'll say that the scene tree's pause property should be equal to true. And this pauses the whole game. So let's see how that works. If we play the game again, and let us get killed by this crab enemy. Cool. The crab stays here and we can no longer draw new cards and start our next turn, right? But what happens if I restart the game? See, no matter how I click on this, I can't restart the game for now. And that's a bit weird, isn't it? So what happens here? Well, first of all, if we go back to the battle over panels scene and go back to 2D view, we need to say that even though the game is paused, we can still interact with these buttons. And it's pretty simple to do in Godot actually. So if we select the battle over panel, the root node, you can see that for nodes we have this process group here. And if we expand this group, we have this process mode. And there's a really long explanation, but what we need to do is we change this inherit to always. And this means that this panel will always be processed even when the scene tree itself is paused. So now if we save the game and run it again, and let us get killed by this crab enemy, then what happens is I can click this restart button. Okay, so the scene is reloaded, but still I didn't draw my cards. Why is that? Well, because the scene tree is still paused. So we got ourselves a new bug here. How do we fix this? Fortunately for us, that's not a hard fix either. If we go back to the battle scene and select the battle's script, what we can do is when we start the battle, we make sure to set the scene tree's pause property to false, right? So we can do something like getTree.paused equals to false. And now if we save the game and run this battle again, and let us get killed by this crab enemy, we can press the restart button and see the battle starts all over again. Cool. But we still have one more problem, and then we're ready with this. I turned off the audio, I muted both the buses, so I can go on with the video. Actually, let me just mute the sound effects and turn only the music on. And see what happens when we run the game. Okay, so the music is playing right now. But what happens when the crab kills me? See, pausing the game and pausing the scene tree means that the music player is paused too, so we no longer hear the music. And that's a problem, right? When we restart, the music will start playing again. But that's really up to you how you want this to behave. So if you want the music to be continuous, so keep the music track playing even though when we run the battle end screen, then we need to make a slight change to the music player too. So if we go back to 2D view, press Ctrl-Shift-O, and search for musicplayer.tscn, what we can do is we can select the music player node and set the process mode from inherit to always for the music player too. And if we save this and run the game again, and let the crab enemy kill us, you hear that? The music's still playing. Even when I restart the game, right? Okay, cool. Okay, so we are basically done with the game and the project. We are at the state where we wanted the game to be when we started a while ago, right? But since games like these are really content heavy, let me give you some bonus content and show you how we can add new content to the game. How easy it is with this architecture and code we have. Okay? So first of all, I want to show you a really cool feature which probably none of you knew about, but it's really, really handy. So let's collapse all these folders we have here and create a new folder in our file system. So right click on the root folder, create new folder, and it's important that you call this script_templates. Cool. So now in this folder, we'll create a new folder again, and we'll call this folder node with an uppercase N, and that's really important too. So if we create this folder, you can see that we have this folder structure here. And if we go to project and project settings, we have under the group editor, we have an option called script. And you can see that we have this templates search path, which is set to our script templates folder automatically. Cool. Okay, so this was just a double check if we have this set up. And what we can do is we can create our own templates. So when we create new cards, create new enemy actions, we don't have to start from scratch all the time. And this is really, really handy, I think, for content creation here. So what we do is we create a new script here in the node folder. So right click this folder, create a new script. We'll call this card_template.gd. Press create. And double click to open this up in the editor. I linked the documentation downstairs, but I'll explain what we do here to the best of my abilities, right? So first of all, we'll have two meta comments at the top, and I took these from the documentation. We'll use this name and description in the editor when we actually create new cards. You'll see this text and this description there. Then we can give a bare bone, a skeleton of a code we can start from when we create new cards. So new cards will always extend the card class. They might have some optional sound, for example, or an export variable. And what we do know is that they always need to override the apply effects function. And here they want to do whatever they want to do with their logic. Here I just use two print statements to make sure that the function body is not empty. But here lies the logic for that specific new card, right? And that's a template we can use for cards. So we can save this with Ctrl+S. Go back to the file system and create a new one for the enemy action as well. So right click on this node folder, create a new script. We'll call this enemy action template.gd. Press create and double click to open this up in the editor. And you'll see that this will be super useful. So first of all, again, we'll have a meta name and the meta description. So we can see what kind of template this is in the editor. Then we make sure that this new enemy action template we have always extends from the enemy action class. Then we override the perform action virtual method. And first we do our check if we have enemies and targets set up correctly. And if either of those are missing, we can return from the function immediately. Then, and this is really cool, I think, we can do this start position, end position calculations. We can create the new tween. Because if you remember, I said that one of the drawbacks of this encapsulation method is that we always need to do these tweens over and over again. Well, we don't have to do it really if we have a template ready to go, right? So even though the code gets repeated, but it still encapsulates all the logic for that specific enemy, and we don't have to start it from scratch. So that's really the best of both worlds, as you'll see when we create a new enemy type. Then I just included a line to play that specific sound effect if you want something like that. And that's really important that at the end of every enemy action performed, we'll need to emit this enemy action completed signal, right? So just by having this in the template, you are less likely to forget to emit this signal when you are designing new enemies, right? Awesome. Save this template with Ctrl S. And if we go back to the file system, we can create the last one for effects. So right click this node folder one last time, create a new script, and we'll call this effect template.gd and double click to open it up in the editor. And the effect template will have its meta description too. Then we'll have a custom class name, and here I just use a placeholder name like my awesome effect, because all effects are extended from the base effect class, but they need to have their own custom class name so we can use them in our code. Then we can have an optional member variable, for example. But what we do need to have is the execute function, which overrides that virtual method. And here, just like with the cards, I've used a temporary print statement to have something to get started with. And again, we can use this template to create new effects, and the code will be easier to create and is less error prone, because we won't forget that the function we need to override is called execute, or we won't forget to use a class name because we already have that provided for us in the template. That's super cool, so let's go ahead and save this too with Ctrl S. And let's see how we can use these templates in practice, right? So the next step will be creating a new enemy type, the bat enemy. So how can we create a new enemy? Well, it will be pretty simple, I promise. So if we go back to 2D view and take a look at our file system, we have this enemies folder, right? So expand this folder, we can collapse the crap for now and create a new folder here under the enemies. And we can call this bat. And in this bat enemy folder, we can right click and create a new resource, because first of all, we'll need to have stats for that enemy. So search for enemy stats.gd, and we can call this resource bat_enemy. Save this, and if we expand the folder, we have our new resource here. So we can set the maximum health to something like 8. And for the art, we can load this image from the art folder. This bat sprite will be perfect. Okay, but we still need an AI, right? So if you remember, the AIs are inherited or saved from the enemy action picker scene. So if we press Ctrl-Shift-O, search for enemy action picker, we can take this base starter scene and go to scene, save scene as. And if we go back to our root folder, we can save this under enemies bat, and we can call this bat enemy AI.tscn. Cool, so we have this AI scene here. We can rename this to bat enemy AI. And if we double click on the resource again, now we have a scene, a brain we can assign to this AI slot. So we can drag and drop this bat enemy AI here. But this enemy action picker is still pretty empty, right? So we'll need to add 2 new actions here. So click on the plus sign and add a new node. Select it again, click on the plus sign, add a new node. And we call the first one bat attack action. and the second one, bet block action. So let's say that this enemy has two kinds of actions, an attack action and a block action. Cool, but how do we create the actions? So if we select this bet attack action here and click on attach script, here comes the really cool part. So if we go to this template property here, you can see that we have our own custom templates here. So we can select enemy action, and you can see that this meta description and name we used. So the meta name is the one we have here, and the meta description is what we have here. An action which can be performed by an enemy during its turn. Cool, so if we click on create, you can see that we no longer have to code this from scratch because we have our own custom skeleton for this, right? How cool is that? But still we can make whatever modifications we want for this. So for the most part, I've kept this skeleton, and let's see what we do here. Let's say that this bad enemy attacks us 2 times in a row, not just once like the crab. So let's say it has 4 damage, but it attacks twice, right? So we'll have an export variable for the damage, so we can tweak this easier. And then after setting all these basic variables, like creating the tween, a start and the end position, we'll create a new damage effect, and we'll set the amount to the damage we have in our export variable, and also set the sound to the enemy action sound effect, which we'll set in the inspector. And then what we do is we tween the enemy to the end position, execute the damage effect once, wait for a while, execute the damage effect again, wait for a while, and then tween back to the starting position. And then don't forget that when the tween is finished, we can connect an anonymous function and emit this enemy action completed signal to make sure that the enemy handler can move on to the next enemy and execute their action as well. Cool, so now we have our bat enemy, which can attack twice. Save this script with Ctrl S and go back to 2D mode to attach a script to the block action as well. So we do the same, we select this node, click on the attach script, we'll select the enemy action as a template here as well, and make sure that the name is in snake case, so bat block action.gd, press create, and here we don't actually need much of that skeleton we have, but still we can always delete what we don't need, right? So what we do need here is an export variable for the amount of block this bat can have, and we still have the safety check under the perform action function. And what we do here is we'll create a new block effect, assign the amount, set the sound to this sound we have in the enemy action nodes property, and then execute this block effect. And to make sure it's not immediate, we'll wait for 0.6 seconds and then emit this enemy action completed signal, so the enemy handler can move on to the next enemy. Cool, so now we have this block action set up as well. We can save this with Ctrl S. And let's not forget to go back to 2D mode, and we need to set these actions up in the inspector too. So if we click on this attack action, you see we need to set up a bunch of stuff. First of all, we'll create an intent for this. So click on new intent. For the number, we can type something like 2x4. And for the icon, we can use anything we like really. I use the same knife here. For the sound, we can quick load the enemy attack.ogg. And this won't be a conditional one. So this bet will have, in this example, this bet will have a simple AI. Both of those actions will be chance-based, but this will be a very aggressive enemy. So let's say it has 75% chance of attacking and 25% chance of blocking. So we set it to chance-based, and we can set the weight to the attack to something like 3. And for the block action, we'll set an intent as well. Here we can leave the number, the string empty, and load this little wooden shield we have. For the sound, we can again quick load the enemy block sound. And this won't be conditional either, but it will be chance-based instead. And the weight for this will be 1. So this has a weight of 1. The attack action has a weight of 3. In total, that's 4, right? So the block action has a 1/4 of a chance happening, which is 25. And the attack action has 3/4 of a chance of happening, which is 75%. Perfect. That's all the setup we need for the AI. And we have our resource ready to go as well, because we have the AI scene attached to this. We have the max health and the art. And that's all there is to it, to creating a new enemy. Now, all we have to do is instantiate it in the battle scene. So if we go back to our battle scene, you can see that we only have one enemy under our enemy handler. But what we can do is we can duplicate it with Control D, let's say 2 times, and rename the first one to crab enemy, so we can know which is which, and this can be bat enemy, and the other one can be bat enemy as well, so it will rename it to bat enemy 2. And we can move those a bit. So if I press W to go into move mode, move this somewhere here, for example. Yeah, that looks perfect. All we need to change is the stats property, right? So it says that it's a crab enemy as well, but we can change this to a bat enemy. So if I drag and drop this here, we'll change it to bat enemy, and we can do the same with the second one. So I'm still in move mode. We can move it here backwards and change its stats to batenemy.trs. And we can move this a bit so they seem more in line. We can save this with Control S and run the game to see how it looks like. Cool. So you can see that all of them want to block this turn, which is a pretty low chance actually, but you can see that the health has changed. So it's really a different enemy this time because it only has 8 health. And I only have blocking cards too, so I can end my turn here. Cool, and now you can see that this bat wants to attack me. So if I play 1 blocking card, it should attack me 2 times in a row, dealing 4 and 4 damage. And bam, it works just like that. So that's pretty cool. We have a new enemy here, and it's working properly. And that's all there is to it. But did you see the order which they performed their turn? Let me go ahead and show you again. So let me just real quick set the warrior's health back to 35. And run the game again. So pay attention to the order of the enemies. What happens here? Did you see that? The crab acted first, then this bat, and then this bat. That's really weird, right? Let's see that again. The order is still the same. That's a bit weird because it would make sense that this enemy executed their turn first because they are at the front, right? And see what the enemy handler does is it takes its children in order and executes their turn. So the order of these nodes matter a lot, right? Because the crab enemy is the first child to this enemy handler node. So if we want the order to be consistent to the visuals, then we need to move this bat enemy, this one, to the first place here. So if I move this up to be the direct child or the first child of this enemy handler node and run the game again, now they should be, yeah, the turn order seems fixed now. So that's one thing you really need to pay attention to. Okay, so that's it for adding a new enemy. So now that we have more enemies to fight, it makes sense to create a new card so we can deal area of effect or AoE damage to them, right? And that's the final thing we'll do in this course. So how do we create a new card? Well, first of all, we need to create a new card resource in the Warriors cards folder. So right click this folder, create new resource. This time search for card.gd. We'll call this warrior / save this, double click this, and we can change the attributes. So for the ID, we can use the same warrior /. This will be an attack card, and the target won't be self, but rather all enemies. And since it's an AoE card, we can change the cost from 1 to 2, so it's a bit more expensive. And for the card visuals, we can select an icon. We can load this double or bigger X we have here. That seems perfect. For the tooltip text, we can use BB code like so, deal 4 damage to all enemies. And for the sound, we can quick load this /.ogg, so it's a bit different from the other ones. And that's all we need for the card. This resource is perfect, but we need to add it to the starting deck so we can actually draw it when we play. So double click on the warrior starting deck resource. And I'll make this a bit wider so we can see what's going on. And let's say we have 10 cards and 2 of them will be slashes. Let's say we can swap out a block for a slash and a basic attack for a slash card too. Cool. Now that's all we need in theory. So if we play the game now, cool, we can draw this new card and see it says it costs 2 mana and it deals 4 damage to all enemies. But what happens if I play this card? The mana gets subtracted, but nothing happens, right? Because this warrior/resource has this basic card.gd script attached to it. We still need to code the logic for the card. And to do so, we'll create a new script. So right-click this cards folder, create a new script. We'll call this warrior/.gd. And make sure to select the template because this is why we created this. Remember, we have a new card logic template here. And if we press create and double click this to open it up in the editor, we'll have our template ready to go. And the code is actually super simple for this. All we need to do is to create a new damage effect, set the amount to 4, set the sound effect to the one we have for the card, and execute the damage effect for all the targets. And that's it, because if you remember, the targets is an array which is set up already correctly for us in the base class. So we just need to execute it for all the targets. That's it. We can save this with Ctrl S. And let's not forget to go back to the file system and select this warrior/card resource again and change the script, right? Because it still has this basic card script attached to it. And we can override this with the warrior/script. And the slight inconvenience we have here with Godot 4 is that the resources will reset. So we have to set the icon and the sound again, but it's not that big of a deal. And if you remember this, you can change up the workflow. So you start with the script, attach the script first, and then you don't have to change it twice. I just wanted to show you this, but it's not a big deal. We can load the icon again and set the sound again to this /sound. And for the final test, let me turn the audio back on. Sound effects. We can lower this down so you can still hear my voice. But if we run the game again, we should have our AoE card ready to go. Cool, and I drew it for the first hand. You can see that if I drag this over and play it, all 3 of those enemies take damage at once, 2 mana gets subtracted, and I can still kill this bat enemy. Cool. So in my next turn I can kill the other bat enemy. And in my final turn I can get rid of this one last crab here. And you can see that the victory condition is still working no matter if we have 3 enemies or just 1 enemy. I still only win when all of them are dead. So we can click on this awesome. And that's it. It's this easy to create new content for this project now. How cool is that? And that's it. Our battle simulation of cloning Slay the Spire in Godot 4 is complete. It's feature complete. You can see that we can add new content. We have a bunch of polish added as well. And it's fully playable. So I hope you enjoyed this course. It was a ton of fun to make. And I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.